Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us today. Now, before we start, I've made the slides that I'm sharing with you today available on this short link here, which you can see, and there's also a handout that you can download from your control panel under handouts, which has some notes and some useful links for you as well, including this link to the slides. Now, please feel free to share what you want to from this session on social media, including the link to the slides. And if you use the hashtag working from home, that's one we've been using and a lot of other people are using on this topic. So it's quite interesting to look at what people are sharing. Okay, so let's get started. Why have I been asked to talk about this topic? Well, I began learning about remote technology when I still had an office job. And I needed to attend events remotely. But then in 2010, I had to work from home for a while because I was unable to travel. And then 9 years ago, I set up my consultancy from home. And I was really helped by some tips from my mum, who spent over 20 years as a translator working from home as well. So today I'm going to share with you what I learned from her when I was starting my journey and really helped me, and then obviously some things that I've picked up along the way, which I think you might also find helpful if you're a new person working from home. I'd like you to think about working from home as an opportunity. At least you've saved the journey time, but we are now in uncharted territory for some of you. Now, if you know how to work from home, if you've done it before, if you've already got permission to work from home and you've tried it, you'll have seen the benefits already, and you know that it can help make working much more sensible, practical, and enjoyable. But that isn't the case for everyone. Many people who've never worked from home, even if they have a desk job, which means they can pretty much work anywhere, for those people, doing it can be daunting and fraught with challenges. If you don't get it right, if you don't get into the zone, working from home can be difficult and it can be impossible for some people. So I'm going to have a look at that and talk about the practical and the emotional sides of home working. And then I'll cover some tips for managers of remote teams, because I know some of you who are joining us have just got that job and they've never done it before. We'll also have a look at remote video conferencing, which is so important for keeping connections with people. And finally, I've got some other tools which can help you manage communications and collaborations from a home environment. Okay, so let's start with the practical. You're going to be using your home for two parts of your life, two parts which are likely very different until now. So to make that work, you need to make space in your home for your work life. So the first thing is to find somewhere to work, to have your own space, your own room if you can, where you can shut the door. This is quite important. If you don't have a room, then try and use a space that isn't used during the day. So don't use the through lounge or the kitchen diner if you have other people in the household during the day. Instead, think about maybe a dining room that you can close the door on, or the corner of a bedroom you can screen off later. So try and find your own space. Then we need to talk about tech, power and Wi-Fi. You'll need to be near a couple of sockets, obviously. And if you don't have Wi-Fi, can you connect directly to your broadband router? Do you have broadband? If you don't have broadband, can you tether to your work phone? Does it have unlimited data? Of course, equipment is really your employer's responsibility, but at times like this, we do need to do what we can to help each other, but keep your line manager informed about what's going on, and obviously make sure you don't overload your sockets. Okay, and the third and final thing on the practical side is the ergonomics. And you may remember a long time ago, you might have had an ergonomics check at work. You need to try and recreate the principles of that if you're working at a desk at home or at a table or whatever. And the key things that are important is if you sit on a chair with your feet flat on the floor, is your lap horizontal? Are your knees at 90 degrees? And can you sit with your hands on a keyboard with your elbows at 90 degrees? They're the most important things. And the way to sort that out really is to first of all find the right chair where you can sit that way with your feet flat on the floor. Then try it under whatever thing you're going to put your computer on, and make sure that you can get your hands horizontal as in the diagram. And if you can't, of course, you can raise and lower the desk a little bit, but of course raising and lowering the chair is more difficult. And then the last thing to think about is the screen height. The top of your screen should be at eye level when you're sitting upright, and that's quite difficult with a laptop. You can always use a lot of books, but with a laptop you may need to get a separate keyboard to make sure your hands can be low enough and your screen can be high enough. So start with the chair, then with the table, and then with the screen, and that way you can resolve most of the problems and you'll not get neck ache while you're working. So those are the practical things. Well, that's not too difficult, is it? But let's think about the emotional side of working from home. Which spaces you're going to use, and then use them in a healthy, structured way. That way you can set boundaries, which can obviously help, particularly with children. You can manage expectations, and maintain your relationships, and of course keep your sanity too. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing, and this is a lot for you as well as everyone else, is to stick to the same routine as you did when you were commuting to work. For example, get up at the same time, get washed, get dressed, have breakfast, and start work at the same time that you used to. If you have routine break times, have them at the same time as well. Sit down with your family or your people in your household and agree when you'll be working and when you'll be at home. You can always adjust that routine later, but if you keep to the one you're used to at the start, it'll make the transition that much easier for you and also for your co-workers. Okay, so the second tip is to work when you're working and don't work when you're not. Have a separate space. Because you have a separate space, that can help. And of course, you can use the door. Shut the door, and that means that you can't be disturbed. And it's also a very useful guide to the other people in the house, including children, that there are times when mum or dad is working, and there are times when they can come and see you. So use your door for that. And also be wary of, make sure you avoid distractions. So for example, if you don't use social media for work, don't use it when you're in your workspace. Reduce your calorie intake to to account for your exercise amount. Bear that in mind. And also, don't work longer hours. Here's a picture that Celia put up at the weekend. It's really important that you look after yourself and don't get carried away working more because you don't have to commute, because all your work stuff is there. So turn things off when you're not using them, put them away. That's another advantage in the room to work in. Close the door, or you can screen off your computer. And then you should do something to unwind, just like you did when you had a commute. You can again take a walk, do some exercise, meditate, do some cooking, do something that's not work related, brings an end to your day. I used to work for a boss who really had trouble trusting people to work if he couldn't actually see them sitting at a desk. And this is a feeling that I think some people who are managing home workers might be feeling at the moment. He had a problem with the idea that that you can recognize results rather than hours spent as well, which was quite difficult. But in fact, being productive isn't a factor of being at a desk in an office. You can be very productive when you're not even at the desk. Recent research has suggested that the average office worker is only productive for about 3 hours a day. So there are plenty of distractions in the office as well. So it's important to remember that people who are working from home are not skivers, and you need to collaborate with them and build trust from day one. Okay, so now whether you feel that you personally don't trust your team, to work from home, or whether they feel that they can't be supported, it's the manager's job to make it work. And there is a real direct connection between lack of trust and unpredictable communication patterns. So the first piece of advice that I gave was that it's vitally important to communicate more often and more clearly, because a lot of communication is taken away when you're working remotely, and you need to replace that somehow. So commit to regular contact with each of your team as individuals and with a group of a team who are working together. If you can make a structure of regular catch-ups, that can help everyone remain confident in what's going on, and they know that they're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. Okay, the second thing was about being tempted to spy on your workers, and there are tools that actually allow you to take screenshots from their webcams while they're at work all the time. I would discourage that attitude as a whole, because your staff really need your support. And the way to keep tabs on them is actually to keep good communications with them. It's a false economy to make them feel that you're spying on them. So that's part of the trust building exercise. And then I talked a little bit about making sure that you're aware of tone of voice. Tone of voice is easily misinterpreted in text-based communications like emails and text messaging and so on. And remote working can exacerbate that as well. So it's really important that you make sure you ask questions to ensure you understand what's being said, and don't feel bad about that at all. And also, of course, using telephone and video conferencing regularly to keep that audio and visual contact, which can really help build trust and keep everybody comfortable. And then lastly on this section, I talked a little bit about security, which obviously will be of concern to everyone. We are in very unique times, and you need your staff to help you comply with your security requirements. There is a guide to home working that's been produced by the National Cyber Security Centre, and I put a link on the handout which you can download. It's very useful, covers accounts management, access, software tools, software as a service, so software in the cloud, and device protection and things. So if you haven't looked at that sort of thing in your business before, it's a really useful place to get started. Then we went on to video conferencing and doing it in a professional manner. The first thing to say is to avoid embarrassment, it's important to make sure you're not disturbed. So even if you can only do it when you're video conferencing, you'll need to do it in a closed room. You should also be wary of your background, set it up for the audience, and make sure you're not sharing anything you don't want to share. You can personalize it as well, why not? Some tools can let you blur the background, like Microsoft Teams. When you're on a call there, you can blur your background. It's very useful as well. Then you need to make sure you check audio and video are working before you join the call, and most tools will actually prompt you to do that. Turn on your video as well. It's really important to get that eye contact and visual cues. And if you have memory problems, broadband bandwidth problems, you can always turn them off temporarily, but use your cameras at the beginning if you can, because it really does help. Then I mentioned, if you're in charge of the meeting, make sure you keep it short and structured with good facilitation, because people can disappear on a call much more easily than they can if they were in a room. So make sure you do introductions at the beginning, you make sure everybody says hello, and then create space for quieter members to speak. Bring things in as part of your facilitation process. And then lastly, we talked about sharing screens. If you want to share your screen, you should choose the application window rather than sharing your desktop if you can. But if you do need to share your desktop, then make sure you clear it and take away anything you don't want to be visible before you start sharing. And one useful thing I mentioned is that you can have, if someone's taking minutes, on a Word document, for example, get them to share their screen, and that can really keep people on the agenda as you're working through the decision-making process and the structure of the meeting. Okay, let's have a quick look at some tools very quickly. Now, if you're in a larger organization or the one that uses Microsoft 365, you'll probably be using Teams, or you'll have started using Microsoft Teams. There are good things about Teams. It has meeting, chat calling, and collaboration tools all built in. But if you're not on Microsoft 365 or you're not using Teams, there are a couple of other tools that you might think of using, which have some of those other elements too. As far as calls are concerned, I would recommend Zoom. And of course, there's a link to all these tools on the handout. Zoom is better than Skype for conference calling, largely because when Microsoft took over Skype, they left a legacy of personal Skype addresses. So you'll probably be finding if people are calling Skype for business, they're trying to log in with their personal account. And there's a little technical issue there. But I've switched to Zoom when that was going on, and I found it absolutely fine. As far as email is concerned, email is great, of course, and we all live in our inboxes, but there's a tool called Slack, which is much better than email if you want to have ongoing discussions between groups. The functionality of a tool with like Slack is also built into something like Microsoft Teams, but it's a very good one, and it's one of those free to use or low cost tools that's in the cloud, that's easy to access if you're a small team as well, and quite cost effective. And then how about encouraging yourself and your team to work? A couple of tools for this. One of the tools I use is called Todoist. It's a very simple to-do list, which is free for single users, and you can share with others. And so that's just like having a checklist, but it's in the cloud and you can share. Then there's if you need to do time tracking and you have spreadsheets and stuff and it's all a mess, think about using something like Toggle, which is a very simple time tracking app. Again, it's free or very low cost for teams. Trello is another tool for planning and organizing your work tasks. Again, it has a free option, and it's a visual tool. It's quite useful, although onboarding is a little bit difficult, so getting to learn how to use it is difficult. Some of my associates use a tool called Monday instead for project planning. Now, of course, you'll have bigger tools that you will be using that you can access through the cloud if you're a larger firm, but if you don't, these tools are low price entry or free to use, and they're also all in the cloud, so they're a useful low cost option if you don't have those other services available online. Okay, so just to conclude before we go over to Q&A, don't forget to download the handout with all the notes and links, and a recording of the webinar will also be sent out to you by the team. I'm sure you've got many questions, so I'll hand you over to Jenny to go to the Q&A.
Another question is, how long would it take when you first started working from home to become more efficient? Because obviously when you first start working from home, it's a new environment, and then how long does it sort of take for you to become sort of more efficient like you would be in the workplace?
That's very interesting, because of course I was setting up a business at the time, so what I was doing was changing as we were going along. So it's difficult to put a time on it. I think one of the things that's going to be happening now is that people are going to take a little while to get into the routine. And when you're not in the routine, it can be very difficult, and you don't want people to burn out because they're doing too much work. So it's important to set up a structure so that you can benefit from it. I think that main efficiencies is you have more time, and if you can get away from other people and do the sort of work where you need to get away from other people, and actually that's quite difficult to do in a busy office, you might find that you're immediately much better at writing reports or getting a knotty problem sorted that you always had trouble doing at work because you're always getting interrupted. So some things like that you might find you're immediately better at. Other things will take more time, and quite often it'll be a technical issue. It'll be, are you up to speed with the software that you're using? Have you got technical issues you've got to resolve? Those things can be a bit of a problem.
So at the moment, working from home is still a novelty. When will that
Yes.
wear off, do you think? And
Oh,
and how to look out for it?
oh, that's an interesting question. I think there's a initially. I think you can. I think it's going to be a novelty for everyone, and I think the advantage for a lot of people is that there are a lot of people working from home now, so it's more familiar to people, and you've got colleagues who are working at home too. So you'll probably find, particularly if there's several of you, you will slip into a routine much easier than I did. I think I found it more difficult because there was a tendency to think, well, yeah, I can do what I like. I can work when I like. And it also is going to depend on your relationships with other people in the office, because it'll be fun for a while, and because you'll be able to do things that you couldn't do when you're at work. But I think because we're a lot of the organisations who are doing this are dealing with crisis communications and handling changes in other ways of working, we're all going to knuckle down, and the priority will be, let's get the practicalities sorted, and let's make sure that we can keep the show on the road. And that so I think the novelty will wear off rather quickly in this case.
Finally, I've got a couple of questions here. So what is the best way to keep motivated?
I think you should reward yourself, and I'm a real advocate of rewards. It really works. So I think you should promise yourself things, so that and if you can separate, if you can give yourself jobs and have your list of things to do, and when you get to a certain point, tell yourself that when you get to a certain point, you're going to go out in the garden, or you're going to play with your son because it will be break time. If I can finish this by break time, I can go and play with my son, and create rewards like that. As long as it isn't cream cakes all the time, that might be a bit of a problem. But I think rewards are great. I also think if you're thinking about your team and rewarding your team, then it's a brilliant thing to do to encourage people to think of ways that you can reward their work and share it with other people, and make competitions and get people to share things on the collaboration platform you're using, have prizes and all sorts of things like that to keep people communicating amongst anything else. I think that really helps motivate people to work.
I think David Kant also said that set goals for reward. So another sort of
Absolutely.
point there. Also, in the early days, sort of no one knows what's going to happen. What's your advice on dealing with people's fear of job security? Let's say they are auditors who visit businesses regular as part of their role, but are not open. So what's your sort of view on that?
It's very difficult in this situation that we're in. I think generally anyone who's tried to run a business knows that there's a lot of uncertainty in it anyway. And if you're an employee, and I never thought I'd be anything other than an employee when I started, and I thought I wouldn't be able to cope with the uncertainty. But one of the things that you need to be aware of is that you don't know what's going to happen, and all you can do is do what you can to encourage things to happen the way that you need them to happen. So if you focus on that, if you focus on this is our objective, and that's what we're going to work on. If things come in and they stop that happening, then if you're all talking to each other, you can work out a way to pivot, as they say in the startup industry, to switch what you're doing that works better, to come up with innovative ideas. And it is absolutely possible to do that. especially if you're working like this in a free situation. Now, everybody is very uncertain, and I find the sort of familiarity of home actually provides quite a lot of comfort. So lean on that a little bit, but also lean on your colleagues, because you are working together, and you're going to try and get through this together, and support your family to feel that way as well. You know, this is an adventure, if you like. As my husband says, with a few rude words, it's not just life, it's an adventure. So try and see it as, you know, it is uncertain, but we don't know what's going to happen, but some of it's going to be interesting, and we just have to do what we can, and don't worry about what we can't do.
So thank you so much. I know that we did experience some technical issues, which I think was one of your points on your slide, actually. And we did do a test run prior to the webinar, but unfortunately, technology, and I suppose at the moment everyone's using their broadband and live streaming at the same time. So for anyone who is listening, we have got this on a live recording, which we will send you after the session. Bear with us, it will probably take about an hour to come through. And that we can speak to Sue and see when she's next available to perhaps do this again another time. And just want to thank you, Sue, for your time today, and for everybody who's joined us on our first live webinar.
Yeah, and if you did have a question and you couldn't answer it, you can go on to LinkedIn, and I've posted a thread on LinkedIn where you can ask your question there, and I'm do my best to answer it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Sue, and have a great day. And for everyone who's watching, enjoy the rest of your day also.